As if we weren't discussing Mexicans killed, dismembered, and discarded on a highway. There are 49 people. Idiot?
Since the battle against drug cartels in Mexico intensified, several massacres have occurred. The massacre of immigrants in Tamaulipas, the Casino Royal Massacre, and the Allende Massacre. You can already find these three on the channel. And also, unfortunately, there have been many more. However, the incident on May 13th, 2012 in Cadereyta, Nuevo Leon in northern Mexico is possibly one of the most impactful in the country. On a local road in that municipality, the bodies of 49 people were found. Who were these innocent victims? That was the biggest mystery because the bodies had no limbs or upper part. The bodies, 6 of them, were of women. They had signs of suffering that dated back to before they lost their lives. In the early hours of May 13, 2012, the authorities of Nuevo Leon classified the events as a settling of scores between criminal groups. Apparently, this terrible act was a message from one criminal gang to another.
It remains unclear if cartels displaced by the Zetas should be included in Nuevo Leon statistics, or if they should wait for confirmation that they were killed outside of the state. Do not count them, just look at the nonsense, not to mention the foolishness they worry about.
The governor of Nuevo Leon rushed to say that it would be impossible to identify those remains, and soon they were thrown into a mass grave, condemning them to hell. Of an anonymous end.
Do you think that the families, the mothers who are crying today, those people have something to do with it? Do they care at all if you include them in the statistics on this side or the other?
According to the investigations, the removal of these people's limbs was done in a place different from the discovery. At the scene, a tire track from a cargo truck was found where the bodies would have been transported to where they were found. That although the authorities should have obtained the statements of the people who could have witnessed the events, this was omitted. But this is not all. The errors in the investigation multiplied. The place where the bodies were found was not properly preserved, and there were serious errors in the autopsies performed.
The victims were kidnapped and murdered in Tamaulipas, then dumped in Nuevo Leon territory.
According to what was believed, the tragic crime began on a bus traveling on the border with several immigrants on board. Apparently, the bus was stopped by a group of armed men who deprived the migrants of their freedom. They made them suffer and then took their lives. This modus operandi was similar to what happened in San Fernando, where in the year 2010, immigrants were deprived of their freedom and dismembered. As I tell you, in San Fernando, Tamaulipas, a neighboring state.
Do you know the name of the alleged perpetrator of all this? Yes, it had to be that way.
The madman. The little progress that was made in the case was when the army captured one of the alleged perpetrators, Daniel de Jesus Elizondo Ramirez, known as the Madman.
He was the plaza boss in Olones municipality.
According to justice, what happened in Cadereyta was committed by the Zetas cartel, created by ex-military and one of the most dangerous in Mexico and Central America at that time. But everything became confusion from that moment on. The group's leaders, Heriberto Lascano and Miguel Angel Trevino, El Z4T, ordered banners to be displayed in various parts of the country to accuse other rival groups of these terrible actions. Apparently, those of the last letter wanted to distract the authorities and force them to attack their enemies. Did the investigation stall because that was believed after this?
Together with another individual named Jose Ricardo Barajas El Bocinas, they were directly responsible for executing the 49 people.
In Mexico and other Latin American countries, there were thousands of entire families wondering if perhaps their relatives who had migrated in search of better possibilities could be among the 49 bodies. But returning to the capture of the madman, well, when this happened, they failed to clarify to whom the nearly 100 torsos belonged. In his statements, he didn't clarify the victims' identities or how they ended up with the drug traffickers. He only commented that he received the bodies with the order to throw them in the central square of Cadereyta. By that time, it was not known whether the deceased had any connection with criminal groups or if they were simply innocent people who were deprived of their freedom just to take their lives.
With all due respect, I hold the people of this nation and the families of the deceased in higher regard. They don't care which side of the statistics you're going to put them on, sir. They care that the culprits are found.
The 49 remains of the people found lifeless in Cadereyta continue to be unclaimed. The genetic profiles of individuals were analyzed by the Directorate of Penitentiary Services nationally, but none were identified.
Authorities said that among the victims, there could be undocumented migrants. Even the government of El Salvador asked Mexico to share the genetic information of the bodies to compare it with relatives of missing people in Central America.
Right now, we are even planning to send them to consulates in other South American or Latin American countries.
Some saw in this sad event a sign that the illegal substance cartels had decided to attack not only their rivals but any person. A strategy that began to be noticed around September of 2008 when several grenades exploded in Morelia, Michoacan during the independence celebration. But that's a tale for another time. Similarly, at that moment there was a transformation, as I tell you, of the scenario, and the cartels began to carry out a fear strategy in which they selected victims indiscriminately.
They care that the culprits are found. They care that this does not happen again. They care that there are no more shells and people lying in the street in a pool of blood. That's what matters.
The Mesoamerican migrant movement carried out a protest, in fact on board the freight trains crossing Mexico, to demand that this massacre be investigated. Based on international protocols, the activists intended to avoid mistakes in the investigations, as happened with San Fernando in Tamaulipas in August of the year 2010, where some relatives of victims in Honduras received bodies of unrelated people. What was demanded was a clean identification that families could close their eyes, end their mourning, and stop searching for their relatives endlessly. But you know, unfortunately, this seems something hard to fulfill, especially in this country. Especially because the deaths of undocumented people are not usually investigated if they are not usually investigated. Those of the Mexicans, imagine those of immigrants. Mexico, well, it's a graveyard of immigrants, unfortunately. By that time, 20,000 migrant people disappeared each year. For this crime, there are no offenses, subjects to process, or seemingly guilty parties. The right to justice has been repeatedly denied to the relatives of the victims, and so the years began to pass without anyone giving an answer about their identities and the guilty parties. 8 years later, another dark chapter was written in this story of impunity. The file of this case, with the initial investigations carried out by the Attorney General's office in Nuevo León, disappeared.
Do you know what the most important complaint is? That the documents, the files, have disappeared.
Fabian Cabaret, coordinator of the Comprehensive Defense Area of the Foundation for Justice and the Democratic Rule of Law, filed a complaint about the destruction of the file. But here the question is, or was it? What happened with this case, with this file? Well then, to avoid the fragmentation of investigations, the Attorney General was asked to bring the file, which was located in the state of Nuevo León. And it was then when the local prosecutor's office stated that they were not in a position to deliver that file, because the company to which it had been delivered for its remission to the Federation apparently had destroyed it.
That leads us to think, therefore, a bit about the lack of care that there may be when dealing with matters of that nature.
This action, which can be classified as possible complicity, leads to the concealment of facts, situations, and suspects that could be decisive for the clarification of this crime. At that moment, the organizations, the activists, and above all, the families of the disappeared felt like starting from scratch and with nothing with which to start a new investigation. Once again, justice left them in the void, in the abyss. They had no choice but to lead the investigation themselves. Or they always do it and finally start to bring closure to this horrendous story. And so soon the authorities threw them into the common pit of oblivion, as I was telling you. But the love of the relatives and the work of civil organizations managed to recover the name of 8 of them, all Central American migrants. In 2015, a young woman arrived home in crisis in La Paz, Honduras. Over the phone, an anonymous official warned her from Mexico that they found an identification of her brother Fabricio among a pile of bodies in this massacre. Doña Norma, their mother, scolded her and her other daughters for crying and forbade them to believe in that lie. But as time went by and her son and the friends he emigrated with from Honduras didn't report back, Norma began to doubt. Overcome by sadness, she prayed and fasted for 3 days, begging God to bring her boy back safe and sound. One night, she dreamt of him without arms. Defeated, she changed her prayer, asking the Lord to bring him back to her as he was. 27 months later, what we could call a miracle happened. Fabricio came home, but not as his loved ones would have wished. The young man arrived in one of the 8 coffins transported from Mexico to the Honduran department of La Paz. This event in Cadereyta barely received a slight mention in the Honduran media. In Mexico, the news caused indifference. No one or very few people seemed to care. And so, to start these anonymous migrants from a pit located 3 borders away from their country of origin does not seem impossible. But it seemed like Fabricio was determined to go back home, and the discovery of his identification led to the first miracle that attracted the others, the union of the mothers, wives, and sisters of the missing. A fortunate encounter with a Mexican organization searching for missing migrants, with a committee of Honduran mothers, and separately a forensic team specialized in impossible tasks. And so, Fabricio Anabel Suazo Padilla, Javier Edgardo Tejeda Vázquez, Ramón Antonio Cortés Castillo, Mauricio Francisco Suazo Mejia, Elmer Said, Barahona Velázquez Sever, Josué González Betancourt, José Enrique Velázquez Zelaya, and Leonel Dagoberto Rivera Cáceres reclaimed their names on the graves that housed them. At the end of April of the year 2012, these young people set off for the United States because that was the purpose of the trip, to get ahead. The last time they had communication with them was on Cinco de Mayo, where everyone called asking for money and for it to be sent to them. At that time, they were in Tamaulipas, renting a house where there were another 53 people. Then, on Sunday, May 13, 2012, the television reported this abhorrent fact, and they were scared when Fabricio's relatives revealed the anonymous notice they received by phone. Thus, Patricia Suazo became the driving force of the search and convinced each family to join. Until together with a group, the mothers, sisters, and wives presented themselves to the chancellery of their country, and soon they took blood samples from them. In those days, the director of consular affairs of the chancellery, Yvonne Bonilla, summoned them and told them that the Mexican government had informed them that only the body of Eva Betancourt matched the genetic sample. It felt terrible, like starting from scratch. By then, they were expecting a strong call to attention from the Honduran government to the Mexican one, a pat on the shoulder as a gesture of condolence or some gesture of solidarity, but they received nothing.
The omissions and lack of investigation is what has characterized the matter for the past 10 years, both on the part of the Nuevo Leon Prosecutor's Office and the General Prosecutor's Office of the Republic.
Feeling once again at the first square of the search, Patricia Suazo looked up the Saltillo migrant house on the internet and told them her story via email. That's how the Foundation for Justice got in touch with her and some Argentine anthropologists. It turned out that the identification of the remains from Cadereyta was a case they had. The Argentine forensic anthropology team collected additional DNA samples from the families, but the Mexican government refused to accept them. Months later, the Public Ministry of Honduras repeated the process because the results did not match. And throughout the process, they were accompanied by members of the Committee of Families of Disappeared Migrants from Progreso, brave women who since 1999 have been searching for their missing relatives on the route to the United States.
Only 16 bodies have been identified. All the other families are still wondering where their people are, where their relatives are, whether it's them or not.
This group was made up of several women. Doña Norma, the mother of Fabricio Anael Suazo, who first lost her memory and denied the situation, but then began to attend meetings and put pressure on the officials. Doña Claudina Castillo, Ramon's mother, a woman who was over 80 years old, did not speak at the meetings and was depressed until one day she began to express her feelings. Georgina Vázquez, Javier's mother, who developed diabetes and hypertension after the news and was almost mute. But the struggle made her rebel, start to speak, and today she is the treasurer of the group.
I am Ana from Ever Jose Gonzalez Cotenton, one of the victims of the Cadereyta Massacre in Nuevo Leon on May 13, 2012. By then, my 23-year-old brother had left behind his children.
The group also included retired teacher Vitalina Velasquez, mother of Elmer Zahid, who had been hospitalized and was believed to be on the verge of death. But she began to get out of bed and travel with the others. Maria Estela Mejia, mother of Mauricio Francisco, an 80-year-old woman who cried alone at night hiding from her husband so as not to cause him a heart attack.
We want to know about that case, about my brother's file, about how that massacre happened, about the violation of our migrants' human rights.
For these mothers, the disappearance of their children worsened their health. How do you realize? Sometimes they were on the brink of madness. Others were in the struggle. Others didn't even want to get out of bed. Their lives were surrounded by pain, and bringing them back was a great relief.
Gentlemen, Mr. President of the Republic of Mexico, we demand as a committee that we be given a response, that the information be made public.
Another painful experience was discovering that the government was not an ally, but an indifferent, indolent enemy. The last stretch of the process, when they knew they had been identified, things did not get better. Instead, there were many more problems. They got worse. They waited 6 months and even passed another anniversary of this sad event to finally have a definitive date, which was constantly postponed. Every time they announced that it was a fact, that they were going to receive their relatives, a new paperwork error would appear. None of the governments wanted to pay for the transfer until the Mexican one did, but things once again got dark. Because on the morning of July 21st of the year 2014, the Honduran Foreign Ministry unexpectedly called all the families to notify them that the bodies were at the airport, and if they did not come for them, they would leave them in the open air. That was a new suffering, but not the last. And it's that the women of La Paz knew that they wanted to force them to pose with officials who were going to take credit for the repatriation. And that they also wouldn't have the privacy they wanted to reunite with their children. And sure enough, as they imagined on the 22nd day, the press lashed out at them in the morgue for not allowing themselves to be photographed, and the families struggled for hours to prevent the coffins from being transported in something that looked like a garbage truck. It wasn't until the afternoon when the funeral processions arrived in the city. The streets were overflowing with people. Many or most were mourning the unjust losses of honest men and women who had gone out in search, as I was telling you, for a better life for their families. They walked for 27 months without knowing where they would end up, but this felt like a triumph. Bringing them back to their native country was a victory, despite the bad within the good. They cried, gave thanks, and cried again. Did they ask you why the feat of taking their lives? But they glossed over the way they were, the way their will to live was taken away. They could only refer to that sharp pain as torment because they still couldn't put it into words. And
I think we have the right to know what happened, the truth, what occurred, why was it. If they were not, they were just migrants. They were not drug addicts or murderers.
In the end, they announced the creation of a new committee, the Committee of Relatives of Missing Migrants from Central Honduras, Committee of Relatives of Missing Migrants from Central Honduras. They also began to show the design of the shirts they had made and to talk about the cases they began to handle. For her, the fight still continued, and thanks to her struggle, they have achieved 16 of the 18 identifications in the case, demonstrating that the articulation between families, organizations, and authorities is key to advancing in the search and identification processes.
It's already 10 years since that tragedy that caught attention at the time. But despite the time that has passed, the victims are still waiting for truth, justice, and reparation in this matter.
12 years after this sad event, Osman Baquedano was finally able to return home to his family in Honduras. Osman's identification was added to the 18 that had been identified in more than a decade among Hondurans, Nicaraguans, and Guatemalans. Fabienne Cabaret, the acting director of the foundation, explained that Osman's identification was achieved thanks to the Forensic Commission, created in 2013, to know the identity of the victims of the three most emblematic migrants in Mexico, those of San Fernando, Tamaulipas in 2010 and 2011, and that of Cadereyta. Osman's identity was then known because there was information that he was a cousin of another of the already identified victims. Currently, the name and nationality of 30 people, 6 of them women, are still pending to be known. Currently, his remains are at the Institute of Forensic Sciences in Mexico City. The large group that was formed is still working on identification. However, all of this takes years, as you already realize. And unfortunately, there is little or no support from the governments in the process, both from the Mexican and those of the country of origin.
Because unfortunately, the Mexican government has not demonstrated the will and ability to resolve these issues.
But well, finally, and sadly, this chain of events remains unpunished for various reasons. Here you go. The first due to the endless fight against organized crime groups, the other due to the exploitation of the migrant population. Finally, the worst aspects are the complicity and participation of the authorities.
Public officials are so far removed from the citizens, they are very concerned about the statistics. Of course, so they don't count that there are 49 more dead in Nuevo Leon.
2 governors of Nuevo Leon and 6 attorneys and prosecutors of the Republic have paraded through their positions since the 49 bodies appeared without justice, which, knowing these governors or these politicians, will continue this way.
It is not really known at what moment they were deprived of freedom, deprived of life, and how the transfer of the victims occurred.
The evidence related to the case, including the blankets located at the scene, was never properly analyzed, and in various states of the Republic, the case was not even linked to other attacks committed around the same time. In Mexico, there is a growing trend of indiscriminate violence targeting civilians, and that is the most dangerous part of the fight against drug trafficking. Citizens are no longer just collateral victims, which is very important. It's no longer about them losing their life because they were on the wrong path. No, they take everyone equally now. Now, these characters use them to instill fear and establish themselves in certain parts of the country, heating up the plaza, as I mentioned earlier.
We want to know, we want to realize, let them tell us who did it, why they did it, where they did it, who sent them to do it, and at the same time, we want a response from justice. We want justice.
It's 13 years without those responsible and with remains that are still unidentified. The families continue waiting for answers and reparation. The missing remains of the identified victims have not been located either. We must also not forget that the victims were civilian migrants. Young people, parents, brothers, sisters, daughters, who were forced by the social, economic conditions and the violence of their own country to migrate in search of better living conditions.
He left, headed to the United States, and in Mexico his life was taken away. He was just in transit through this country.
Mexico has long been a country of origin, transit, destination, and return for migrants. Those who, in search of a better future for their families or to escape violence and poverty, decided to migrate and on their way through Mexico were liquidated, deprived of their freedom.
A case where impunity has prevailed. There are no arrests, no criminal proceedings or sentence for the Cadereyta Massacre.
The reason young people seek life in the North is because there are no jobs and neither education nor health are guaranteed. If they're lucky, they can have one meal a day, and if not, they have to keep going. Many have skills in a variety of trades. Because in a society where you constantly have to survive, human skills emerge and you learn to do everything.
We want the transit of migrants from all over the world who are heading to the United States to be respected for human rights.
Many of the missing were entrepreneurs, with a spirit of freedom, but with the freedom to do things right, to desire endless possibilities, to have the desire to change their cruel destinies in poverty.
The relatives of
We went out
from here looking for a better life, but it was the worst thing they found on the way.
Skillful lives that are wasted by countries that force them to leave, leaving behind their families, parents, siblings, partners, and children, promising to return soon.
We ask ourselves every day why they were killed, because the truth is our children were not criminals. They didn't deserve to die. We demand answers now.
A promise that is seldom fulfilled when the supposed countries of opportunities shatter or dust their hopes.
And we have no answers. What is the Mexican government hiding?
For more videos about searching mothers, check out Pepe Misterio's channel with new uploads every Monday and Wednesday. You can find several of these ladies who are dedicated to searching for their children. And if you want to see more videos of drug traffickers, you can also see them on this channel. There was one last Friday and the Friday before that as well.